Meesha Rosa. I'm the Vice President of Corporate Board Services at Catalyst, the global nonprofit working with some of the world's most powerful CEOs and leading companies to build workplaces that work for women. And I lead the board initiatives at Catalyst. This is a very important conversation about the advancement of women of color in business leadership. And as we look at the landscape, women of color represent 18% of the entry level positions, but just occupy 3% of the C suite positions in the US. Um, at the board level, it's even lower. Women of color hold 4.6 of Fortune 500 board seats at America's leading companies. Yet, they represent approximately 20.3% of the US population. So I'm delighted to have you all join us today for a provocative conversation around advancing progress for women of color. I'm absolutely thrilled to have with me two highly accomplished business leaders, advisors, industry, and DEI experts, authors, and participants of the Catalyst Women on Board program. I admire these two women, and when they talk, I listen. And so, Rohini Anand, founder and principal of Rohini Anand LLC, also the former senior vice president of corporate responsibility and global chief diversity officer at Sodexo. We also have Gale King, an independent director at AutoZone and JB Hunt, and retired executive vice president and chief administrative officer at Nationwide. Thank you, ladies, for joining me today.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
And I'm just happy to have a lot of people coming in to join the conversation. So I know that we'll have a really great conversation and some great questions from the audience later in the conversation. But quickly, you both have had impressive careers. Tell me a little bit about, the roles and experiences that you've had, how you've grown as leaders, and about, how you've enabled yourself to continue this journey as corporate leaders in the business.
All right. Well,
I'll
first of
start
all,
with Gail.
all right. Meesha, hi there. Hi,
Hi.
Rohini. Looking
Hello,
forward to the
Gail.
conversation. And
Likewise.
thanks to all of the participants for joining us today. As Meesha says, I am just recently, I think now, today is the 15th, so 15 days retired from Nationwide. But, I spent my entire career there, 37 years. And, I would attribute my success to one, joining a company I love that understood the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and understood how important it was to create opportunities for all of their associates. In my case, I had the wonderful honor to have many sponsors and mentors along the way. I took advantage of every opportunity that came my way. And so I always encourage leaders, young people, always, wherever you are in your career, to take on staff assignment, take on business assignment, take on project assignments, always take on risky assignments because you have such an opportunity to learn and to showcase your skills. But at the end of the day, for me, I think everything really boiled down to the right culture, the right company, and also my doing the work that was necessary, high performance, strong communication skills, and on a constant journey to really deliver great outcomes. So high level, those are some of the things that led to my success.
Thank you. What about you, Rohini?
Yeah, so very similar, Gail. Hello, everyone, and it's wonderful to be with both of you, Meesha and Gail. So very similar. I was with Sodexo for 18 years and joined because of the commitment of the CEO to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Clearly, the company needed a lot of work, but the CEO had the commitment, had the passion. And I would attribute, so I was there as SVP, as Meesha said, for corporate responsibility and diversity, equity, and inclusion and wellness. And I'd attribute my success to the sponsorship of the CEO. He positioned me and DEI for success. I reported to him globally. He didn't put DEI under HR, and that sent a very powerful message to the organization. But I would say that I gave him something in return. So, I think sponsorship, as Gail said, is very important. But I gave him something in return because I branded him internally and externally. As a leader in diversity, equity, and inclusion, I built his DEI legacy, his brand, and also his learning. So I would say that the culture of the organization is extremely important, and the commitment of leadership is absolutely important. And seek out sponsors and mentors to help you to succeed.
Thank you both. I want to take a deep dive in some of the statistics I mentioned earlier, and so let's take a journey and really talk about these numbers. We've seen overall progress, ladies, for women in corporate leadership at the C-suite level and at the board level, but progress for women of color has been slow. So I want to get a little bit of take from both of you. What do you think are some of the unique barriers to the advancement for women of color into some of these key leadership roles, and what would be some of the factors for success to propel women into some of these key leadership roles? So I'll start with Gale. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. At the end of the day, to impact change, I mean, the system, the powers that are the people who are in position now must be really intentional about how they want to change the organization. And, one of the things I would say is that, in the past, I believe that, people thought about it, but I don't know if they were as intentional. Not every company was as intentional in ensuring that they had a pipeline of talent being developed in their company to make it to the C-suite, because from the C-suite, you can move into a corporate director role. And then again, I think that as boards were looking for board members, they were relying too heavily on their past profiles. And I think, as you know, Meesha, certainly, and Rohini, that in the past that you typically look at prior CEOs or presidents of operations. And in that time, if you think about the journey for women of color, we were not in those positions. But I think now, as a post-pandemic world, that people are understanding that those skills are valuable, but that there are a lot of other skills that's critical for board success. But at the end of the day, if you're going to affect change, it has to begin at the very top of the house. And that begins with the board governance and the CEO saying, these are the things we need to pay attention to. And what strategy are we putting in place to ensure that we're recruiting, that we're developing, and we're recruiting that talent to represent the company that we support.
Yeah, and that's a nice segue to the conversation, Rohini, because you were in that role. You mentioned earlier in your introduction that you partnered with the CEO to do some of this work. What do you think is most important to pay attention to when aspiring women go to their talent and diversity office area and say, I have interest in developing myself as a high potential? Tell me a little bit about your role in partnering around that to build out the strategy.
So for women to actually, what they need to be paying attention to. So I think women of color, as Gale said, I think, the intentionality is very critical in the part of the organization, the CEO, and I know we'll explore that more. But as far as women of color is concerned, I think the intentionality on their part is absolutely critical as well. So have a plan, work the plan, make sure that you know your value proposition. Each one of us has unique skills that sometimes we take for granted. So be able to articulate those skills very clearly. Gale and I both talked about mentors and sponsors. So seek out a sponsor and have that individual advocate for you. And very often women of color don't necessarily get those visible roles. As Gale mentioned, P&L roles. And I think that it's a sponsor that can help you to get some of those visible roles that may be high risk, but where you can really demonstrate your skills. So sponsorship is extremely important. Also networking. I think we're very good at networking, but leveraging that strategic network is absolutely critical. So, I would say intentionality on both sides is very critical. And I think that, in terms of the question you asked before about the slow progress, I think there are, several reasons for that, but know that, women of color have skills, corporate sustainability, socially responsible investing, sales, government. These are things that today are at the forefront of the pandemic growth, post-pandemic growth. but don't exist on boards. So these are unique skills that women of color have, and the supply is there. We just need to leverage it.
The
Right.
one thing I do want to add on that, when you talk about, and I mentioned this earlier, that, when in the past boards had relied on a certain profile.
Right.
And again, I think my own personal profile didn't fit that profile. I am a chief HR officer and administrative officer, but again, it's around that tenacity of the individual, and Rohini spoke about that. So when we talk about intentionality, it's intentionality on the board side, it's intentionality on the CEO side, but for the individual to stay persistent on it. When you believe you have something to offer, you'll continue that journey until you get that seat. And that's what happened with me. I knew I was going against the tide when I first joined on a board, but I joined a company that was looking at culture. And then that worked for me. But again, the networks, as Rohini said, all of those things are important, but you've got to want it and you've got to continue to pursue it.
Absolutely. And from what I'm hearing from both of you is that you have to know your value proposition,
Right.
understand your set of skills, your competencies, but also make sure that you're building the right networks, actually going out there, seizing out opportunities, but also partnering with influential others who could speak on your behalf as
Right.
well. So really, really honing in on your competencies and skills as you navigate this ascendance to corporate leadership.
And don't forget not-for-profit. I know, Meesha, you want to move on the next question.
No, it's okay.
But there's so much to learn from being involved with, not-for-profit organizations, because you begin to understand, how to work on an audit committee or a development committee and those types of things.
Yeah, I
Right.
think that's a really important point, Gale. I think that a lot of learnings can come from being on non-for-profit boards.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to both of you ladies about this, having served in the roles coaching women around readiness and high potential leadership. I think nonprofit is the way to actually hone in your governance skill, and that's actually a great way to actually build out and expand your network so that those folks that are also serving on for-profit boards can actually speak on your behalf as a candidate for consideration. So that actually is key. I do want to move on because we have a short span of time, and I just want to make sure that it's not always about fixing the women, because as Rohini and you, Gail, has also mentioned, that we do play a role in making sure that we actually seize those actual opportunities to hone our skills. But there's a role that organizations have to play in the potential of women that are high potentials and want to advance their careers. What role do you think organizations should be playing in the actual development of high potential women that want to, have aspirations for C-suite or board service?
Yes. So I can take that, Meesha, in terms of, organization. So I'm going to make a quick plug for my book that's coming out in the fall. It's called Leading Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And I talk about principles. So there are three principles that I think are very relevant. One is transformative leadership. And I call that leaders change to lead change. Leaders have to internalize the benefit of diversity, equity, and inclusion if they're going to lead with purpose and passion. And it's those leaders, those transformative leaders, that sponsor women. They help to build the pipeline. They're the ones who sort of ask the difficult questions during succession planning discussions. They set targets, they measure, they hold their teams accountable. They provide access to women of color to networks, and they're intentional and make this a priority just like any other business. So, I would say that, part of this comes from their own growth and journey, but I do remember one CEO who actually mentored a woman who was managing a high security facility in the UK. And after mentoring, sponsoring her, he came to me and he said that, if I had to select the best candidate between a male and a female to manage this high security facility, I would have chosen the male just because it's a dangerous environment. You need an assertive, aggressive style. He said, but after mentoring this particular woman who is heading this facility and has a very different leadership style, I will never let that bias of mine come into play. So I think, it's those leaders that internalize these messages that are able to be intentional. And then I would say the other piece there is what I call know what matters and count it. So I think it's really important for organizations to parse data by women of color. And, different individual groups of women of color have different experiences. My experience as an immigrant, being told, go back to where you come from, is very different from the lived experience of an African-American woman who's marginalized and discriminated within the, sort of potent historical context of enslavement in the US. So I think we need to parse that data, because the ways of progressing or advancing women of color are different depending on their lived experiences. And then the last thing I will say is one of the principles I call go deep, wide, and inside out, which to me is about really ensuring that you're embedding the advancement of women of color within all your systems and processes, whether it's talent processes or marketing or supply chain, all of these processes, because they are interconnected. So let me just stop. I would say transformative leadership, measurement, and embedding it in systems and processes in order to advance women of color and build that pipeline to the C-suite and boardroom.
Thank you. And I just want to, just for those of you that are just joining, we're talking about how to advance women of color into corporate leadership. So thank you for joining for the first time. I'm going to, in a short span of time, kind of push through the conversation around boards, because we talked about, the slow growth for women actually sitting at the boardroom table. And you, Gale, as a sitting director, I want to ask, how boards are actually grappling this issue around talent, and you having a large amount of experience around managing, administrating as a chief CAO, have a lot of experience in this area. So how are boards grappling this issue around talent and the ascendance of people of color into key corporate roles?
Yeah, I think very similar to the question that the answer that Rohini just gave you is that, and I do want to just comment on that. At the end of the day, organizations really need to have a human capital strategy.
Yeah.
And that strategy begins with data, just like when they have a growth strategy or whatever strategy they have to know what they look like and what are they trying to solve with some clear accountabilities. And so I use that same comment to talk about what I've seen with our board, at least the two boards that I'm on, plus Nationwide's board, that they are looking to say, what additional information do they need? They've asked for an assessment of everything that impacts that experience. And so I think what they're saying is we want we want an analysis of what is the state of the company. We want to have more frequent updates on, what's our goal, what's our progress. And because again, whatever the board pays attention to, management pays attention to, and it gets done. The CEO and management ensures that it gets done. So again, I just think there's more questions, there's more accountability, there's more follow-up. And in some cases, they're linking it to performance back to the accountability, scorecarding back to the accountability, and more frequency in front of the board. Again, more accountability.
Right. So I want to kind of take a deep dive before I take this question from the audience. But, in terms of being inside the boardroom, because a lot of women who ascend for board leadership don't really actually know what actually happens inside the boardroom. So there's a nominating and governance committee that actually has the responsibility for building the pipeline of future board directors. And there is obviously the numbers could be somewhat aligned to not knowing where to get the candidates of color, or knowing where to actually look at talent. So for Gale, I want you to kind of hone in a little bit about the nominating committee process and tell us a little bit more about that.
It begins with the nominating committee in terms of, so you want to focus now on board diversity and what are they doing? Again, what you're doing is you're expanding, your sourcing. And so that's the role that the nominating committee does, and which they're now doing is in the past, in many organizations, they've relied heavily on, who do you know? And who do you know typically tends to sort of continue to perpetuate, what the current board makeup looks like. And what we've seen, and certainly I've seen it on our board, on the boards that I'm on, is that they have expanded their sourcing. You can leverage. We have strong partners. Catalyst is a strong partner. The Executive Leadership Council is a strong partner. Deloitte. I mean, there are just so many organizations who can help boards identify diverse candidates. And then there's so many search firms who really that's their specialty. So again, but again, unless you're intentional about what you won't do that. And I mean, so naturally, if you're trying to expand and you're trying to increase your diversity, you go to the places that will help you connect you with people of color or whatever it is that you're looking for. So yeah, they've the nominating committees have expanded, how they identify new candidates for board seats.
Can I just add to that, Meesha, just really quickly? I mean, clearly, Gale, you hit it on the head. And I think the other piece is really having the right conversations, right? Asking the right questions, challenging. When someone says, okay, I have a woman of color as a candidate, and I've heard this actually, you have a board member say, well, should we take a risk? Now, what is the risk involved in this? Do we say that for a male candidate? But women of color have to kind of prove themselves again and again and again, and are seen as a risk. I mean, they're no different risk profile than anyone else does. So I think really pushing back and being able to challenge. And for that, as you said, you need different perspectives, because it's when you have those different perspectives that you can actually ask the right questions.
It's really been fascinating. I'm sorry, Meesha, but this year has really proven that if you become intentional about finding women of color, that you'll find them. Again, I mean, that has been the proof, and they are certainly some very talented, just like the men that they have found are very talented. The women, when you look for them, you'll find them as well.
Exactly. And the other piece of that is having those that are your sponsorship and your allies speak on your behalf as a trusted candidate to actually increase your profile. And so we have a great question from the audience here about nurturing those kinds of relationships where people can actually advocate for you. How do you suggest, they're asking, how do you suggest that someone nurture relationships so that someone can serve in the role as sponsor, be a trusted advisor, and want to pitch you as a potential candidate for consideration or to help you throughout your careers? Gale, you're laughing.
I'm smiling because it's to me, I mean, it begins with you. I mean, at the end of the day, it begins with your work performance and, how you show up every day. Boards especially are, because they, it's a very tight group. They're looking for people who not only bring a technical expertise to the table and our leadership expertise, but they're also looking for great teaming, great collaborators, because that's what they have to do. It's not, I want this, it's what's good, or what does the entire board want. So, to me, it's what is your brand? So you need to really work on what is your brand. Are you viewed as very strong? Are you viewed as a decision maker? Are you viewed as a team player and a collaborator, or get things done? And then you have conversations with people and that's how I started. I shared with, my boss, I shared with the CEO at that time. I said, and I didn't do it when I first moved into the job, but after I had been in my job for a while, I felt comfortable enough that I was ready to take on another board. And I thought it would be good for my development. And I thought I would add value because boards are looking at what can you do for them, as they should, because they have an accountability to the shareholders and the stakeholders. But I think you start with honest conversations about what you believe you can contribute, get feedback from people you trust, and ask for their help. And, I found that the more I put it into the world that I wasn't interested in a board, the more people were willing to help me and connect me with other people, recommend courses that they thought would be beneficial for me, help me think through how to put together a board, bio and those kinds of things. So again, it begins with your brand, and then it begins with you engaging people and asking for their support.
Thank you. And everyone, thank you for joining us for this conversation. Rohini, I actually want you, because you're actually working with your mentor sponsor right now as you begin to seriously consider yourself as a board director. How are you nurturing in the moment that relationship with your sponsor?
Yeah, I think that's, good question from the audience. And I think going back to what was said earlier, I think that it's really important to also let your work sort of, speak for itself. I think it's important to both get clear about what your value proposition is and back it up with specific examples, but also then keep in touch with your mentor sponsor, very closely keep in touch so that you can share what you're doing. Right now, I retired, similar to Gale, but I retired a little over a year ago. And it's interesting because when I had my initial conversation with my mentor sponsor, I talked a lot about my role at Sodexo. And she said, well, that is now behind you. Let's look at your value proposition going forward. I'm an author. I've just written a book. I'm a strategic advisor. So how do these things play into my value proposition? So I would say a couple of things. Get clear, because this is also an iterative process, right? Your value proposition is not set in stone at one point in time. You're learning, you're growing, and that value proposition evolves. So I think keep evolving that, stay in touch, make sure that you again are asking for advice and asking for the guidance that you need, and whatever that might look like in terms of leads or networks, access to networks, and then, show your work. So.
Right.
The only thing I would like to add on this, and I got some really great counsel from Maggie, former CEO of Frontier, and she said, but when you go to a mentor or you go to a sponsor, you need to have done some work to think about what industries are, you don't go and just say to a sponsor, hey, I want to be on a board. Right. You want to be very intentional and give them some direction. I have a passion around transportation. I have a passion around this or that, or I'm looking for an organization that's really focused on culture. So, because part of what you want to help your mentor and sponsor help you. And so the more you can provide counsel to them around where your passion and interest lies and why, I think then they're able to say, okay, who can I connect you with? Right. Because every industry isn't one that you would have an interest in. And likewise, every culture isn't one that you would have an interest in.
Meesha, I think the question was also about the workplace, right? How can you, and I think there, getting onto task forces, becoming visible, showcasing your work to the organization is really important, because the closer that your mentors or sponsor can be to the work that you're doing, the better they get to know you, the more they're able to then advocate on your behalf. So in the workplace, I definitely think, stretch yourself, showcase your capability in the different, aspects of what you do in visible task forces, so that your sponsor gets to know your work and then can advocate for you.
Wonderful. And as we begin to wrap up the conversation, you touched a little bit on the advice, tips for aspiring women of color who want to advance into leadership. But, we talked a little bit about your sponsors and the role they played in your careers. But if you had to think about, you and right now paying it forward, the kinds of organizations that you want to dedicate and commit your time to, how are you doing that, and what organizations are you involved in? Share a little bit of advice with the audience before we conclude our conversation. I'll start with you, Rohini.
Yeah, so I think we've all come on shoulders of others, right? And I think it's really important that we pay it forward. I really think it's important that we lift up other women of color, that we refer them, that we mentor them. And, I am with several nonprofit organizations, so that's how I'm giving back. But there are dozens of people that I'm actually mentoring that reach out to me on a daily basis. I have headhunters calling me, 3 times a week. And I'm constantly connecting them to, to women of color, because I'm not interested in a full-time job. But I think this, networking is as much about giving to people as it is about asking. So I think that, there's a lot that we can do, and it's our responsibility to lift up other women of color. And I would, I love this Margaret Mead quote, which she says, never doubt that a small group of committed, thoughtful citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So I think as we get onto boards, we should help other women of color.
Right. Gale, before I actually chime in on that, we have a great question that I want to address to you from the audience about a collaborative brand. How do you bring your collaborative brand and add value that is broad-minded and expansive, although it's outside the status quo? How do you go against the grain?
In 30 seconds or less,
And
Gale.
30 and
I think, again, it just begins with that managerial courage to speak up. I think oftentimes we hold back because perhaps we think, someone else knows a little bit more than we do. But the more you're confident providing a perspective on a variety of things, it shows up. And the other thing is one of the things that I always prided myself on is that I have strong opinions, but I'm equally okay following someone else's opinion. And I think for those leaders out there who have strong opinions, every now and again, find somebody, a different point of view that you can follow, and let people know. They can see your strength, but let them also know that you're okay being a follower. I think that's just a critical skill when you're being a good team leader and being collaborative. And you have to be intentional about it. You have to be intentional about Rohini and we were on the different pages on this, but you know what? I'm going to go with Rohini on that. Those are great messages to send about teamwork.
Okay. And so I want to give the opportunity for both of you to talk about a lot of what we shared today is inside both of your works as authors. And so, Gale, the title of your book, I know Rohini, you touched on the title of your book. We could reflect back
She
on that
touched
again.
on the title of her book. Yes, I am so excited. Mine is out this September, and it's called Impact Bound. And basically what I've done here is told my story in terms of how you can move from the margins to the C-suite, and in the process change your life, and hopefully have contributed to corporate America and the community at large.
Rohini, tell us the title of your book again.
Yeah, it's called Leading Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And, there's lots of books about DEI culture change in the US, and there's a lot of academic books about global DEI. This one is a view from the trenches. It's based on my story, my work, and insights from over 65 different companies. So it'll be out in the fall.
Ladies, thank you so much for actually joining us for this conversation. It's been incredibly insightful. Lots of key takeaways, and I'm sure the audience will actually drop a lot of the comments in my actual LinkedIn chat room. And so I'll be happy to share some of these questions with you at a later time. But we are up against time here. Anyone who wants to follow up and listen to the recording here, please go to catalyst.org to learn more about the organization, about two of the incredible women that are part of the Catalyst Women on Board program, and also to learn about how we can advance women of color into corporate leadership. Gale, Rohini, thank you very much for joining us today. I am just delighted to have you both. Thank you.
Thank you, Meesha. Thank you, Rohini.
Bye-bye.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.